during the lockdown. Oh, are there a few? Okay, a few students that I taught at UCT. We never got to meet, so they were like, okay, we never got to meet because you taught us virtually. So we are here. So Sneh and colleagues, thank you so much. Thank you for coming. So I told you, literally, I do have a story about each speaker. Several months ago, I sent a message to Niven and I said, listen, I don't think that you understand the impact that you've had in my life. I met her in 2016, and at that time, she was heading up the South African Reserve Bank Learning Academy. I was a facilitator on a leadership program, and she saw me in action, and she said, I would like Fortune to be the person who will facilitate the session for the governor and the deputy governors. So she opened that door for me, and then when she moved to Standard Bank, she was doing some work around leadership identity as a result of an operating model change. And she said, I should come there. The person that I worked with on that project moved to Deloitte. So I owe my door to Deloitte, to this woman. And even before I joined Deloitte, I think we can decide. We can decide. I think it's a very good thing. Actually, it's a very good thing. Because I've got my colleagues here from Deloitte today, which means that obviously the relationship is good, right? It's testament to how good it was. But I wrote a post several months ago, and I said, I wish for every woman a Niven who will see you, who will open doors for you tirelessly. She has tirelessly opened doors. There are some doors that she's opened that I haven't even mentioned. You remember StanSlab? I did work for a US-based organization called StanSlab because of this woman. I can't count the number of doors that you've opened for me, and for that, I'm grateful. But like I said, every one of these women comes with a great bio. So I'm really honored to have her today as the keynote speaker. So she is the author of If You Don't Do Politics, Politics Will Do You. That stuff is real, you know? She's also a Harvard Business Review contributor, a lecturer, a strategy facilitator, and I think she's very well placed to talk about corporate politics because she's also had a varied career in executive roles. Namely, she was the CEO of Business Women's Association, the CEO of NOAA, which stands for Nurturing Orphans of AIDS for Humanity. At some point, she was the head of external strategy, as well as the head of the South African Reserve Bank Learning Academy, the head of leadership and culture at Standard Bank. And I would like you to join me in extending a very warm welcome to Niven Posma. Niv, thank you for saying yes.
Thanks, Is that how we're doing it?
Yes.
Okay, all right. So it's really lovely to be here, Niven Posma, 1972. Good Lord. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but you know, when you're having to choose those dates of birth, I'm scrolling. And I got a CV the other day from somebody who was born in 2000. No. I was like, this is amazing, and they can walk and talk and everything. It's incredible. So, yeah, here we are, and what a joy. Fortune didn't even phone me, I have to say. She just WhatsApped me. Can you talk? Sure, I'm there. And, I mean, yeah, what a delight to be in a room with people, to be in a room with women, to be doing something meaningful on International Women's Day, because often I'm really allergic to these things because they're just platitudes and surface rubbish. And, you know, the women are sitting there with screensavers and being called ladies, and it drives me crazy. But when Fortune invited me, I thought, no, if there's going to be something worthwhile done, it's going to be something that Fortune does. And so far, so good. Thank you. So, yeah, I read the room, and I didn't even have to look at you guys. I just heard this well of noise. If you don't do politics, politics will do you. Yeah, I mean, the noise kind of said it all. Look, I've had to learn a whole bunch of stuff around this, and I was, as I said, adjusting my slides right up until the last minute, so I have a few changed things in there. But what I often say is my first executive position was when I was 29. I mean, how they hired me, I have no clue, because I would not have hired me. But after heading up the Businesswomen's Association, which at the time was the largest association of business women in the country, we did very interesting and impressive things at the time. A very good friend of mine from school at the time joked, "Oh, Niv, you just wanted to be head girl all over again." So of course, when they offer you this position, you jumped at it. So at the time, I had no clue. I really didn't. By the time I left, I'd done a very good job, and I own that, and I'm proud of it. And that was 20 years ago. And there is not a single thing that I ever, in any of my degrees, in any of my experience, explicitly got taught about power and politics. Yeah, so I'm seeing nodding heads, I'm hearing the mms. I love the affirmation that women give you. Yes. Sister, amen. It's not something that we think about. It's not something we talk about. Rosabeth Moscanter at Harvard Business School wrote 40 years ago. Power and politics are the last dirty secrets of organizations. It's the things we don't talk about, and yet they're endemic. And they don't have to be dirty secrets. They don't have to be toxic. And so I've started my PhD this year, and what I'm looking at is the intersection between strategy and power. Because this idea that, you come up with the best, most brilliant strategy, and I started my career as a strategy consultant, and that brilliant, best strategy is going to speak for itself. No, I mean, there's always a gap. And the gap is the power and the politics, and who holds that between the strategy that you've formulated and what actually happens. So I'm here to share a couple of myths on office politics that I formulated. This was the subject of the HBR article I wrote last year. I mean, I love saying that. Contributed to Harvard Business Review. My mother tells everybody it's hilarious. But that's fine. At least this one she gets right. At one point, she said I was the head of the Reserve Bank. I'm like, Ma, I'm not. And Catherine and I were at school together. She knows my mother. She's going to laugh even harder at that one, I'm sure. So these are some of the myths that I've pulled together. And before I go into them, I'm just interested to get a sense from people in the room. If I throw out the word office politics, throw some words back at me. What are the words that come out? Chaos? Nice, thank you. What else? Conflict? Toxic. I hear toxic every single time. Yes. What else? Oh, that is hilarious. Okay, that's a first, but I think it's pretty good. Who else? Come. Talk. Sucking up? Yeah. Generally, if I do this exercise either with a Mentimeter, with a virtual group, or in an in-person group, gosh, I mean, the words just come thick and fast, and they are very, very seldom positive. Once or twice you may get a neutral, but positive, unlikely. Most of them are negative. Toxic, absolutely backstabbing, and I had somebody once say heartbreaking. And I was like, oof. Okay, so, we have this mental picture, and it's, to quote the fabulous Chimamanda Adichie, every time I went to Lagos, I thought, maybe I'm going to bump into her today. I mean, very unlikely, but I mean, isn't she an absolute gem? And her TED talk about the danger of a single story. We have a single story about politics. I had a single story about politics for all of my career. And it was really only by chance that I got into this, but this is another story. And the single story of politics is that it's negative, destructive, toxic, heartbreaking, and good grief. Not something that you want to get involved in, which I think then leads to what for me is this foundational myth. Listen, you can either be a good person, or you can be a raving psychopath and you can play politics. And so for me, always, one of my key values is integrity. And I thought, well, listen, there's no ways I can hold on to integrity and play politics. The two are mutually exclusive. So that junk, that rubbish, I'm just not going to get involved in. And I said things that a lot of people say back to me now in courses, and they're particularly nuanced for women. But this myth, like the other myths, is actually not true. Breaking news. It's not. And I had to understand this and learn this, and in one or two instances in the hard way. And so what I never understood, what most people don't understand, is what office politics actually are. Of course it can be the Machiavellian, of course it can be the hideous, the stuff that we've all seen. And there is so much more to it. So it is actually the range of things that go on in every organization, every group, every team, every department, the range of things that we all do to build power, to sell ideas, to get influence. Again, talking about Lagos, I remember when I was there once, stuck in a traffic jam of note. And I mean, those traffic jams are something. And there was this huge billboard that I saw, and it said, "You're not in the traffic, you are the traffic." Wow, that's very deep. It's the same with politics. We are all playing this, but we may not have called it that because we've got such an allergic aversion to the concept because of this single story. And this range of things, the stuff that happens behind the scenes, you can choose to ignore. I always say this in my lectures and workshops. I'm not here to tell anybody what to do with their lives. I'm just here to give you some insight, and then hopefully you make informed decisions. You could absolutely choose to ignore the informal, the unofficial, the behind the scenes. But the reality is that all organizations have got two parts. The formal, the stuff we see, the visible, the organograms, the delegations of authority, blah, blah, blah. And the informal, the stuff that's not written anywhere. It's not written in standard operating procedures or KPIs or job descriptions. And that informal is as real as the formal. And in highly politicized organizations, of which I've worked in two, that informal is actually more important than the formal. That's where stuff really happens. And so choosing not to get engaged in that, fine. But it's essentially like you're playing tennis on half the court. And so how you get engaged in it is also up to you. This is a LinkedIn connection. A man I might never meet in real life, but I loved when he posted this on one of my posts. Yeah, when it works for us, it's being strategic, it's doing my job, managing my stakeholders. When it works against us, bloody politics. Oh, no, isn't it terrible? It is always the same thing, and of course, where you're sitting on the receiving end, or the dishing out end, the positive end or the toxic end, frames how you see it. But the point is there is a range of things here, and of course, as I say, it can be destructive. It can be, and I argue it really should be, constructive, ethical, positive. And so, essentially, I'm having to look back at my slides now because, as I say, I was changing them in the moment. But I remember when Alan Greenspan came to the Reserve Bank and he refused to give us his speech until the last minute because he said, I'll be making changes to make it perfect until the last minute. So I'm sorry. Fortunate if it was good enough for Alan Greenspan and we had to cope with it, hopefully it's good enough for you guys. So I'm looking back to see which slides I've changed. But essentially, it's about a set of currencies, political intelligence, political smarts. But it's not this currency, it's this currency. It's about four things in my experience. One, relationships, the strategic relationships you have or don't have. It's about your influence, how much you have or don't have. It's about the brand that you have. And of course, brand is not a corporate identity and a logo. It's a promise, what you stand for and what people expect from you. And finally, it's about power. And power can also be a word that women are very uncomfortable with. But I loved the reference to Jacinda Ardern because I love this quote. Power without love is reckless and abusive, but love without power is sentimental and anemic. And those both ands are critical. There's an absolutely fabulous Harvard Business Review article written about 20 years ago. And the title is a very provocative question, which I've thrown into groups sometimes. And it is, why should anyone be led by you? Which is a hell of a question to ask somebody and to be asked of yourself. Why should anyone be led by you? And one of the things that they talk about in there as a concept is this concept of tough empathy. So being absolutely clear on what needs to happen, but seeing the person who needs to make it happen as well. And I am so grateful that I learned that very early in my career when I was heading up NOAA. We were looking after about 26,000 orphaned and vulnerable kids at the start of the 2000s, giving them daily care and support. And I mean, it was, of course, an incredibly overwhelming job at a time when South Africa and a lot of African countries were pretty overwhelmed with HIV/AIDS. And I learned this lesson there. And not here, I learned it. I really, really understood what this means. Because, when you're working with rural grandmothers who speak as much English as I speak Zulu, i.e. very little, and you're working with child-headed households, you're working with a 15-year-old who is telling you how he is making sure that his 2 younger siblings are going to school every day and everything's fine. I'm thinking everything is not fine, and would sometimes want to go back to the guest house and weep for 2 days at what we were seeing. I learned there that you cannot have either or, you have to have both and. I couldn't look at these kids and these grandmothers and not see the people and what they were up against. But I couldn't only have compassion, because then I was running a support group. I wasn't running a sustainable NGO that could give answers to the US government. It's interesting to see that USAID is here having a conference. You want to know how you've got to convince rural communities? I know you slaughtered a cow to open the ark, but Washington needs a receipt, people. So this both and is something that I think is not only possible but critical. You don't get anything done if you don't have the both and. And so this idea that politics and influencing people and building power and building relationships is only something for yourself as opposed to an opportunity and a mechanism to get things done for other people who are counting on you, I think is something we've really got to get rid of. I had to get rid of it after 20 years. The second one is this idea that it's possible to avoid politics. So funny, I had a Uber driver take me to a friend's party the other day. And he said to me, so what do you do? I said, well, I'm a lecturer and a consultant. He said, very interesting. And we'd had a fat chat about his daughter, who sounds wonderful. And he said, so what do you lecture in? I said, office politics. Office politics? I said, yes. Office politics? Yes. He started to laugh. He laughed all the way. I mean, he probably laughed for about 10 kilometers in Joburg. Towards the end, I was starting to get a bit annoyed, but I should have actually taped this man's laugh because it's so hilarious and play it every time I show this myth. It's absolutely impossible to avoid this stuff. And you heard from my CV that you're joking. 5 minutes left already. That's impossible. Okay. It's not possible to avoid this stuff. I've worked in all manner of sectors, and it's not where the organizations will have politics, or what kind of politics they will have. Even a friend of mine who was a church minister entered corporate, petrified about corporate politics, but then realized, corporate politics, you're kidding me. They're absolutely nothing compared to church politics. So you find this stuff everywhere. They don't make a difference to your career, could not be more wrong. But I cannot tell you how many women I have heard say back to me what I always said, no, I don't have to worry about this stuff, because my work will speak for itself. Guys, work does not speak. People speak. So who is saying what for you and about you? And I love this book. I think her title's almost as good as mine. She's not saying hard work and talent are not necessary. She's saying they're not enough. They're not enough. And yet, how many women, and I love this quote, how many women I've seen, and I can include myself in it. So we treat work like school. So we think if we just work really hard and put our head down, somebody's going to notice and they're going to give us an A. Work is not school, and I'm writing another article on that. All the ways it's not school. Work speaks for itself at school. It does not speak for itself at work. And yet I think this is one of the challenges of women generally doing better at school, graduating in higher numbers from university with higher marks, is the things that work for us for the first 20, 25, 27 years of our life, we then take to a different environment and think it's exactly the same. It's not. We can have a long conversation about that as well. And this idea that being politically smart is a trait, not a skill. No. I loved your conversation about your legs. I have short legs. In my next life, I've already put in an order that I'm going to get long ones. So the length of my legs cannot be changed. But most other things can be changed. Okay? And it's the same with political intelligence. This is something you can learn if you want to, if you see the importance. And this is one of the slides that I changed. I love this quote from Arundhati Roy. How you make your voice heard, how you take a step back and recognize that your voice has got value, I mean, that's also another conversation. But how you do this, why you do this, who you do this for, cannot be underestimated. And there's a fantastic article worth reading. It came out in the Harvard Business Review last month. And it talks about who cruises on an open highway and who pays toll roads. And essentially, I mean, you can talk about gender and women being one of those groups that pay toll fees. Sorry, not toll roads, toll fees. But in fact, the point that they make, which I think is incredibly important, is that any outsider pays toll fees. Now, women can be outsiders. In South Africa's context, black people can be outsiders. When I was at one organization, it really didn't matter about race and gender. That was not the outsider issue. It was who had been there for 30 years and who hadn't. And so they talk about 3 tolls that the outsiders, and certainly this can apply and does apply to women, pay. The first toll is the toll of opportunity. So you don't hear about the opportunities because they're informally circulated. But can I also push back to all of us to say, when we hear about those opportunities, what we do or don't do about them? I remember when I was heading up the Business Women's Association, it was fascinating. I was phoning the most senior women in the country. I mean, it was a great job going to opening of Parliament and the budget speech, phoning the most senior women in the country to say that they'd been nominated for the Businesswoman of the Year award, which at the time was very prestigious. I think it's lost that, and saying to them, so look, this is the story. And without exception, every single one of those women, the first words out of their mouth, oh, no, I'm not ready for that. Thank you, I'm so flattered, but I'm not ready. Phone me in a few years' time when I've done everything I want to. And I listened to this and I thought, I'm only 29 years old, but I'm thinking this is rubbish. So then I figured out, no, hold on a second, this is women. Give me another time out in 5 minutes. I will finish in 5 minutes. I know the language to use here. So what I said to them was, the next woman I phoned, who then ended up winning Businesswoman of the Year award, I said to her, yes, I know that you don't think you're ready yet, but actually there's a lot of research around women needing role models and needing to see women like them in positions of power. And so actually you owe it to young girls and other women to take this nomination. Yeah. Oh, okay. Now, well, if you're going to lay a guilt trip on me, well, then that's perfect, because, I mean, that's the language we understand as women. So, where do these opportunities come from and where do they go to? And, I mean, I've had to really apply that advice to myself from Sheryl Sandberg's book. Women have got to stop thinking, I'm not ready to do that, to thinking, I want to do that, and I'm going to flicking learn by doing it. That stat from Hewlett-Packard, which I'm sure will be replicated in many companies. Men apply for open positions if they think they meet 60% of the criteria. I'm your guy. And we don't apply even if we know we meet 100%. That's not something that is done to us. That's something we do to ourselves. What is that about? Second is around influence. How you have or don't have coalitions of support. Especially when you're upending a power structure or a status quo, you are single-handedly not going to be able to do it. You need people in your corner who are going to stand up for you. How do you build those? And how do you have access to those or not? And then the last one was around scrutiny. I loved what CJ said. When it's the other, we don't see them as individuals. We see them as them. So I remember when I was at the Businesswomen's Association, a woman came in to me. She said, look, I really need your advice. Bless her. I don't know why she thought I could give it, but I was very flattered. Anyway, the point is she was, had been groomed most of her career to take on a senior role in a mining company. Really excited about it, thought this was the opportunity that she wants to make for herself in her career. And the closer she got to that position, the more she realized, I really don't want to do this. Now that I see what it takes and what the trade-offs are and what the implications are, actually I want to run a mile. She said, but now I'm completely torn because I know when I say to them, I don't want to do this, they're not going to say, oh, well, Niven doesn't want to do it. They're like, damn it, you see, this is what happens when you invest in women. When push comes to shove, they just don't want to do it. And we've invested years in her. So there's a scrutiny that you're seen as a type rather than an individual when you are different, when you're on the outside. And so this is something to pick up on what Zimbimu was saying, that I love Megan Rapinoe. She's the captain of the US women's soccer team. Her biography is very interesting, autobiography, very interesting, very worth reading. And this idea of fear when we speak out. She was asked by an interviewer, aren't you scared when you say the things that you say sometimes, given the people that you're saying it to? I mean, she went head-to-head with Donald Trump. Oh no, sorry, I'm just gathering myself. So, and people said, you know, the people that you're up against and the case that you're making for women's soccer, aren't you scared? She said, no, because I never think about who I'm speaking to. I think about who I'm speaking for. And the opportunity for everyone in this room, women who are by definition privileged, who are employed, are employable, have access, have opportunities, maybe not as many as you'd like, of course you have challenges, but who are we speaking for? And so when it comes to being politically smart, you can get strategic about this. And briefly, as with all strategies, what are you trying to achieve? Do you know? And happiness is not knowing what you want and killing yourself to get it. Who's on your side? Who's not? How do you keep the people who are on your side? How do you minimize the people who are against it? And for heaven's sake, use your energy wisely. Finite energy, infinite demands on them. My sister lives in the Netherlands now after spending 8 years in Nigeria and Ghana and Kenya. She came out to South Africa last year for my dad's birthday. She said she's never seen poverty in any of those countries that she's seeing in Joburg at the moment. I see it when I come to Cape Town every time. We have got infinite demands on our energy and resources as people in an emerging market economy in the 21st century. Where and how are you building and using that energy? And so lastly, let's get two blokes to give you some feedback. No, we won't. Sorry, I did say to you guys that I didn't have AV. I forgot about that. It's a great clip. I'll send it to you. It's basically Steve Carell asking, what's his name? Dwight, thank you. Asking Dwight, what's the best piece of advice I've ever given you? And Dwight says, don't be an idiot. He says, don't be an idiot, change.
What is the most inspiring thing I ever said to you?
Don't be an idiot. Changed my life.
Whenever I'm about to do something, I think, would an idiot do that? And if they would, I do not do that thing.
I have a great range of things that I do now that I absolutely love. And yet I was a complete idiot about this stuff. I managed to achieve a whole bunch anyway, and yet the question still gets begged. What might I have achieved? What more might I have achieved, not just for myself, but for the people who were counting on me, had I known some of this stuff? So don't be an idiot. The stuff is out there. Thanks very much.
How scary are those myths? Because don't we actually believe them to be true? That you can't be a good person and do politics. Niven, thank you so much. I'm going to ask for what? There's a hand. I see Tanya's bringing the mic.
I feel bad because I'm a speaker, so I shouldn't.
Go ahead.
But not so bad that you're not going to ask the question.
No,
I
not at
noticed.
all, not at all. Because I think I was saying the most ahas throughout, so I was probably, if I could have stood up and said, glory, preach it. So, you know, this is an absolutely critical conversation that we need to have as women. I'm currently sitting in my second interim CEO role. I'd been pushing back on it, because I always say I'm a good number 2, because I'll make sure the work is done, but I don't want to be in the forefront because I hate politics. And coming into it, one of the things I said to myself at the beginning of the year was, I have a team that's counting on me to play politics. It's hard. But I actually have had to transition from doing to influencing. And so when you talked, like just about everything you said resonated, because I'm living in a very uncomfortable space at the moment, because the level of politics I'm having to play is completely different to everything I've played before. But it is so critical because I have high-performing teams sitting in the background that are expecting me to play it so that they can do what they do best. And so I think as women, one of the things that we've got to have more conversations about is the incredible importance of politics and how politics plays out at different levels in your career. So thank you for bringing this.
Yeah.
Thank you. You know, it goes back to Niven's point around, you know, it's not about who I'm talking to, it's about who I'm talking for. I've got a whole team behind me that's depending on me to play politics. Wow, CJ, thank you. Okay, Kavita, and then we'll move on to the panel. Sharonisa, may we remove this chair?
Thank you, Fortune, and thanks, Niven, for that really intriguing talk.
Wait, who's talking? Oh, there you are. Let me put on my glasses.
Let me stand up. Yeah, sorry, I know you said one question, Fortune, but I just wanted to pose a question, Niven, and I think the conversation around politics is very important because it plays out, particularly in South Africa, at a different level and depth in the corporate space. So having this conversation is really powerful. I just wanted to ask, are we having enough conversations around the intersection of playing in that political paradigm and still maintaining some sort of psychological safety and just well-being? Because often I find women, especially as they move up that career ladder and the politics get even sort of layered and complicated, they opt out because it has such an effect on that mental space and mental health. So I just wanted to get your opinion on that.
Yeah, so I mean, I would completely echo what CJ is saying, that as you become more senior, you don't do, you influence. And this influencing is not a distraction from your job. Actually, it is now your job. And to understand that and to frame it like that, I think is an important first insight. The second thing is that there's still in your question this binary. I can either survive it and opt out, or I can either survive it and become somebody I don't, or I can opt out. Actually, there's a lot of research that says people who are politically smart have much less stress than people who aren't. Which actually makes sense if you think about it, because instead of trying to figure out what the hell is going on here, how is this working? I know there's something else, but I just don't know what it is. You know what it is, and you're getting smart about it. And I don't think it has to be a gender thing. I think it can be if we don't unlock our minds about this. But it doesn't have to be. So one of the most impressive people I've ever met, she was in the top 5 of a group that's about 60,000 people strong. She was an exco in her early 40s. And she said to me, from the moment she started working, every month, she would sit down and she would think about, who do I need to speak to this month? Who are my stakeholders? So who do I need to invite for lunch? Who do I need to have a presentation with? Who do I need to have a meeting with? And she would then spend the month doing that, over and above the million other things she had on her to-do list. And she did this deliberately as a practice and had been doing it for 20 years. It wasn't an afterthought. It wasn't something she got to when and if she had time. This was part of her strategy from when she was this high in the organization to now she's on Exco. And suddenly I thought, hold on a second. You know, your meteoric rise to the top makes a whole bunch more sense. It's beyond the technical. You have the technical skills, but you have the relationships. You have the smarts, but you have the coalitions of support. And so I think when you look at the possibilities for people, for yourselves, the opportunities to make things happen here in a very different way as opposed to, can I just survive this? I think a whole bunch more ideas and creativity come to the fore as opposed to grit my teeth and just hope I can get through this in one piece. Okay.
Yeah. So you have to do it.
Well, you don't, but no, it's an informed choice if you choose not to. Know the risks and the mistakes in not doing it. Yeah.
Yes. On behalf of Luminary, courtesy of Esther Loader, thank you so much.
Gosh, thank you. This is fabulous. But I know Estee Lauder stuff. They're all this big. What is in here?
Daphne, you're going to have to answer
Thank
that. Wonderful. Okay, so we are moving to our last part of our program, which is the panel. I did say to you, literally, I do have a story for each speaker. So I think a couple of years ago, I was invited by the 30% Club in KZN to speak on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And the person who was convening it is a lady called Wendy Mahoney, and she happened to also introduce me to Lorraine Hill, who we found. We both came from Zim. So, you know, fellow Zimbabweans, we always love connecting. So we connected on that front. But also we connected because later I then led a project in Aspen, which is the organization that she is the Group Chief Operations Officer for. I always say when you're consulting, context matters. So it's always critical as a consultant, I always say, to deliver on the human need as well as the business need. So for me, it was critical for me to understand Aspen as a business, and she was so generous in just helping me understand the context of Aspen as a business. So she joins us today because she's going to be taking part in the panel, and she has over 30 years experience in the pharma industry and is very passionate about women empowerment. So she actually chairs the Aspen Women's Forum, and she is the Group Chief Operations Officer of Aspen Pharmacare. Lorraine, please welcome to the stage. May we please give her a round of applause. And I share these stories so that you just see the support that women give to other women. So I'll always be forever grateful for your generosity. So thank you.
No, thank you.
And then I would like to welcome back on stage CJ. Please give her a round of applause.
So wait, we've just noted a connection as well, right?
With Lorraine?
Yeah, two. One fellow Zimbabwean.
Yes.
Two, she now works with my former boss, which is why I'm now in the interim CEO role. So
Oh,
can
wow!
can you tell him I miss him and he must come back?
Listen, I think we need to do a women's club. You know how guys have the guys club? I think that we've got a women's club loading. Wonderful. So we've got a connection.
We've
so
got a
let's
couple.
get straight into it. Please take a seat.
A couple of
A
connections.
couple of connections.
I'll send you regards, but I'm not asking him to come back.
Oh, okay. Can I come join me?
Sure.
So I thought that we could start our conversation because our theme is break the bias. I thought we could start our conversation with each of you's perspective on what break the bias means for you. And maybe Lorraine, we start with you because you and I had a conversation this morning about we are actually not looking for dominance, we are looking for equality. So what does, in that context, what does break the bias mean for you?
Yeah, so thanks, Fortune. First of all, I just want to let you know we are embracing diversity today, although it's diversity and age. So I am Lorraine Hill, 1963.
We're trend.
I thought it important to note.
Yes, very important detail.
Well done in starting the trend. So I think break the bias means, for me, to have a society where it's really, really equal. And it's not about your gender, your race, whatever it might be. It's really about equality. And when I say equality, it's not the fall of men we're looking for at all. It's the being able to all have a seat at the table. And to be able to have mentors that are men and women who bring different aspects and give you different sides of all the stories so that as a whole in the workplace and at home, you can operate as a fully fledged individual, knowing that whatever you do is going to be seen as meaningful and your contribution and not a supporter and not dominant. So I think that for me is really important. And I mean, I had many important men both at work and at home in my life, as I have many important women in my life. And I think I embrace them all for what they are. And I ask that you know that happens in a workplace, that what your gender shouldn't matter. It's what you bring to the table in terms of skills, empathy, compassion, being able to see things objectively, being able to see things a little emotionally. All of those aspects are needed at the table.
Thank you. So you raise a great point around, you know, it's actually not about dominance or wanting to take out the other gender, but actually about creating equality and making sure that all voices are heard equally. And I think it connects beautifully with what you said, CJ, that actually it's about how do we have a partnership with these people who we believe have influence, have created the system so that we start to undo the system. So with that context, what does break the bias mean for you?
Sure. And I come back because this is such an important part of my life. I have 2 girls, and what I want for them is a world where they can just be whatever they want to be, you know, without any constraints or restrictions. And I grew up like that up to a certain point, right? I grew up with a mother who was just like, oh, you want to do this, do it. You want to do this, you can be it. Yeah. And then as I became more adult, CJ 1978, as I became more adult, I started coming across these barriers that I just did not get. I wouldn't understand. I wouldn't understand why certain doors were closed. I didn't get it because I hadn't grown up with that perception, right? But the reality of life is there are barriers and there are doors and there are certain places that you can't easily get into. And so for me, breaking the bias is not even so much a gender thing. I completely agree with you. It's just about creating a platform where if that's the door you want to open and walk into, you can open it and walk into it. So how do we create that equal playing field for both men and women, for people of different sexual orientations, for people of different sizes, color, whatever that may be, you know? How do we all walk into the doors and through the doors that we want to?
Yeah. So I like the fact that you're saying it's actually breaking the bias is about actually availing all doors that are there for everyone. But you then spoke about this whole idea that there are excuses that are made for these doors to be availed to everyone. And Niven did mention when she said, you know, one of the tolls that we pay for are opportunities that are circulated in privileged circles. So what then do we need to be doing to make sure that those doors are equally availed to everyone? So maybe I'll start with you, Lorraine.
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things. So firstly, a lot of these barriers are invisible. Okay, you can't just see them. They're not something obvious. You can't go and read a book and find them. So it's really about understanding what those invisible barriers are. And then working out perhaps why they were put in place, you know, what drives them to be put in place. So you can start to work your strategy to say, how do I overcome these barriers? But I think above all, and I think it came through in a lot of the discussions today, it's about showing up and having the courage to knock on the door. I think the doors are closed, but did we knock? Did we try and open them? Did we go and get a key, find a spare key and try and unlock that door? Maybe not. And I think it's the courage to say, right, I actually want to be on the other side of that door. So how am I going to get there? And how am I going to have the courage to see what's behind that door? Because sometimes the reticence is also, well, I'm not sure what's behind that door. So it's just much easier to stay where I am and be comfortable. And for me, it's about shifting out of that comfort zone. I think you also mentioned it. And it's about showing up and saying, I want to be on the other side of that door. How am I going to get there? What is the key that's locking this door?
I love that because it speaks to what Yvonne mentioned earlier, saying, you know, it's about saying yes to yourself. It's about showing up, and it's about opting in, you know, like what Niven was saying, that with the politics, you can choose to play it or you can opt out. Would you like to add to what Lorraine has said?
So I would add the other dimension as well. As the people who hold the key, acknowledging that there's a barrier, that there's this invisible barrier. One of the people that I interviewed when I was doing my thesis was a very good friend of mine. She sits on a number of nominations committees. And she talked about how they'd really struggled to fill the role of a CEO that they were looking for. And then she said, no, but you know, we couldn't find anyone with industry experience. So we decided, you know what, let's and they'd been looking for I think initially looking for someone with industry experience, couldn't find one. They decided to go, you know, kind of look across the board. And I asked her, at any point, did you ask if you could find a female CEO? And she said, no, you'd never find them with industry experience. It's a very tough industry to have. And I said, okay, but when you then change the scope of the profile, and you look for someone who's maybe kind of, you know, an intersection, but not industry experience, did you then change the profile at that point? And this is a woman. And she stood back and said, no, we didn't. So I do think that the people on the other side of the invisible barrier also have to acknowledge that there is an invisible barrier. Then maybe before they never acknowledged, they never even noticed. You know, sometimes when you sit in a point of privilege, you don't even realize that you're sitting in a point of privilege. And so just acknowledging it and saying, you know what, maybe there is something wrong. Why are there only women at this breakfast? Have we not allowed the men in somehow? Is there anything about what we are doing that makes them uncomfortable to be in this space? How do we make them more comfortable? So that it's a two-way street. So the women who are saying yes, then are afforded an opportunity because someone behind the scenes is also saying, we haven't allowed women into this space, let's do that.
Yeah. So I like that because then it's a great segue into the conversation around allyship, you know? So I always say, you can't include the other at the expense of excluding the other. I had a few colleagues who decided to emigrate when I was at Deloitte because they thought, the female agenda is just too strong, you know? And so my question then is, how do we form meaningful allyships with the other gender to ensure that we don't alienate the other gender, but we actually help each other engage in what Peter Senge calls learningful conversations, where we share each other's perspectives. What are some of the practical things that we could do to create and forge meaningful allyships?
Yeah, so I think when you have women's forums and groups where you build the women's bonding and allyships, I think what's also important is to invite the men into those, to give their perspectives, to explain to you how they feel when they meet in a meeting and a woman is emotional. What are they feeling? What are they experiencing? And so how do we make them more comfortable with that? likewise, to have the conversation, I think it's come up a few times, men are seen as aggressive. You know, what do the women feel like when they have that? So it's about opening up and having meaningful conversations where you're honest and open, and there's not going to be any repercussions to that honesty. I mean, we've discussed numerous times today, and I think Jacinda from New Zealand is just fantastic, where she says, I can be compassionate and caring, and I can be strong. And I think there's a side of men that can be compassionate and caring and strong. And it's how do we create an environment to bring all of that into one space and make sure that we all understand we need each and every one at the table. The diversity, I mean, I've read hundreds of articles on how diversity drives innovation. Different thoughts, different perspectives, different backgrounds, different perceptions, all of those, you put them all in a pot, and some amazing think tanks come out of it, rather than being held back by bias, by perceived barriers. And I think to CJ's point, and I think what came out when you were speaking, is how do we have forums to make the invisible barriers visible? Once we can see those barriers, what is making it difficult for you to talk to me? What is it for me that it's difficult to talk to you? And how do we just have an honest conversation? Say, I don't think you're listening to me. I don't think you care. I don't think you understand me. And once we have those conversations, then you can say, okay, next time I engage with this group of people, I need to think a bit more carefully about how I convey a message so that they pick up what's good in it and they don't fall into a perception of what I'm trying to say because I am a woman or I am disabled or I am whatever.
Yeah, and I think that point that you make speaks to I think there was a common thread between Zimbini and CJ around the issue of belonging.
Yeah.
That actually what we face here is a challenge around women experiencing a sense of belonging. So if we are going to be deliberate about creating female talent pools, we also have to be deliberate about creating environments where they feel that they belong. Do you want to maybe talk about some of the practical things that we can start doing in organizations to elevate that sense of belonging?
Yeah. I think one of the things is finding ways of bringing critical mass. And I know it's quite difficult. But for example, if I use Niv's example of this woman who was being groomed into a role, try not to only have one person. Try not to spotlight one person. So at EY, one of the things we had when I was there was I was constantly beating this drum because for the longest time I was the only black female audit partner. And I'd always find teams would say, no, but we're making a difference. We now have this woman that we've put on the team and she's going to be the manager. And I'd always say that the challenge with that is it makes you feel, it elevates the otherness. Because for the longest time when you're there on your own, you feel like all the things I do well become, you know, you become the poster child for, oh, that's how all black female partners would do it. All the things I do wrong will be, oh, you see, it's not going to work. So how do we find ways of accelerating that critical mass and finding ways of having more women that you choose from or that you allow spaces to have agency? Because it's also okay for a woman to say, you know, I actually don't want that. I think it's also okay to do that. So, yeah.
Yeah. So it's okay for women to be courageous enough to choose and say no.
Yes.
And actually not fear being judged.
Yeah.
So I also would like to give the crowd an opportunity to ask questions. So please do raise your hand if you've got a question. I want to also then go to moving on to what are some of the practical ways that you've applied as the chair of the Aspen Women's Forum in building a female talent pool within Aspen?
So I think it was raised earlier. I think what is really important is the mentorship and the role model. There aren't enough. There isn't the critical mass, as CJ says. So we need to recognize that and make sure that we expose the women and the men, actually, to that female mentorship, so that there is, I can do it. Someone else has done it before me. They are just a normal person who grew up and has a background just as I have, and really just build that sense of there's a path that I can create for myself, which isn't something that I have to go with a hammer and a saw and really beat my way around it. But to sit and have conversations as ladies, to say, Cheryl, how did you get there?
Yeah.
What did you do? And then I'm feeling really bad. I've left my kids home today. Cheryl says, yeah, I also have that feeling, but it's okay. I have days when I can't get to work because of this, or I want to have 2 children and I'm worried about maternity leave. Yes, I had maternity leave. I came back. Everything was fine. This is what I did while I was on maternity. So it's just all those experiences, because I think for women as well, there's some invisible barriers they create themselves by worrying about their communal, I think was the word used, societal role and the role as a career person. And it's just to tell them, yes, I did have days when I didn't feel that what I was doing was the greatest from a family or whatever perspective. But this is how I talked to myself. This is how I told myself, this is how I can manage this. And you have to just share those experiences. And some have bad experiences. There are some days when you do things and you know that the outcome for your family or whatever wasn't the greatest. And then what did you do to fix it? And the men have the same issue. They have exactly the same issue. They will have to say, I'm not coming to the rugby match or something. So it's really about building rapport, where you sort of make yourself vulnerable, let them know that all the things that they're going through have been through by others before, and share that experience. And then I think that boldness starts to develop and the courage starts to build.
Yeah. Thank you. You want to add?
Yes, could I say something quickly to that? Just something you reminded me of as you were speaking is, as women, we must have male mentors. Because sometimes the things we assume are happening to us because we are women are actually just happening to you because you're an adult. I have... So I have adulting. I have a great mentor who's become almost like a father figure to me. He was the first CFO I worked under when I was like 24 years old. And there are often times when I'll go and I'll be like, oh, but this is not working. And I think, South Africa is really hard because people still see me as black female. And you'll be like, but what happened? Talk to me. And then I'll explain and you'll be like, CJ, you're a senior person in your organization. This is normal. You are just not dealing with it effectively. This is what you need to be doing to deal with it effectively. And sometimes you just need that, because I think a lot of the times we shackle ourselves by, oh, this is happening because I'm a woman. And actually it's just happening because you're an adult or you're at a certain level in your organization and you're just not dealing with it effectively.
Thank you. Okay. Yvonne? So we've got a question. So before you go, Yvonne, I also want you to be thinking, both of you, because Lorraine, you raised the issue around, was there a specific path? People could be asking, is there a specific path that you followed? I would love both of you to think of, you're sitting here as accomplished women in the C-suite roles that you're talking about that are missing females. Is there a formula? There's somebody who might be sitting here and thinking, I want to get there. Is there a formula? What did you have to do? Please think about it. Let's go to Yvonne, and then we'll come back to that question.
Thanks, Fortune, and the beautiful panelist. When you're talking about invisible barriers, one of the first things that came to mind is that these barriers are so invisible against the laws, especially in South Africa, that says actually these are the barriers, right? It's so clear, according to South African law, what are the things that we need to do to bring about equality and equity, right? But they are so invisible that even when we are being told what we need to do to bring about the equality and the equity, we're unable to do it. So we're still talking about gender pay. something as simple as gender pay. It's been a topic for years. We actually have legislation that says create equality on this aspect, but the invisible barriers are still holding us back, which is quite problematic, to say the least, because we're even, these invisible barriers, they even have loopholes for us not even to get there. The second thing that I thought about is we are, I think in organizations create, I think what Lorraine is also heading, about, this as a critical mass, let's talk about these things. I have a thought, unmandated. I just have a thought about what these interest groups can do to actually change the culture, rather than have them as to talk about what is the problem. What is it that we can do as those interest groups to actually inform how succession should look like in organizations? And maybe have a seat when we start talking about those things. Because I think we will then know that the people who are speaking for or on behalf of, this is how they're feeling. And this is how they're experiencing it. When we're talking about positioning C-suite, this is what this interest group is saying about what they're observing. Because it's an interest group that wants to see a change in an organization. So that we don't have them just talking about, so what happens when I go to maternity leave? When I come back, if I was on the succession plate and I was going to be it mustn't prejudice me because I was away for 6 months. Am I guaranteed to actually ascend to the next thing? Or is it taking me back? So that being on that table is going to be critical, so that we are not just talking about we are struggling. Once we've struggled, what's going to happen next? And if we're not on at the table, then we're not going to have the critical conversations.
So Yvonne, I'm going to hand over to our panelists just now. So it's interesting that you talk about gender pay gap, because if you look at the research, pre-COVID, they were forecasting that it was going to take us about 247 years to close the gender pay gap. And post-COVID, I think it's now escalated to about 301 years. Sure. So good luck. But would you like to comment, CJ, and then we'll go to Lorraine. Would you like to comment on what Yvonne said?
I come back to that fourth part of the box that I spoke about.
Yeah.
Because I think it's the most critical. The reality is, unless there is buy-in at the absolute top of your organization, everything else is biding time.
Yeah.
And you see it in organizations where the CEO becomes intentional about building pipeline, intentional about saying, look, in 10 years' time, if I don't have at least 3 or 4 people sitting in my exco who are at this level and who are this type of profile, it's very difficult. Doesn't mean it won't happen in other layers in the organization, but to really have a seat at the table, you've got to make sure that the absolute top leadership in the business buys into this and they don't pay. And I don't want to use the term lip service because it undermines it, because I don't think anyone comes into this maliciously. I don't think anyone is saying, oh, women must just never even get there. But sometimes lip service is saying, okay, this is a problem, but it's not my top 3 priorities. So unless it's sitting on the top 3 to 5 priorities of your leadership team, it's a very big challenge.
Which is scary, because research has shown that teams with women in them actually do perform better.
I think it goes to what CJ said. It's around the willingness. There's legislation and people put in frameworks and you can go in and there's very nice procedures and ways of operating, but it hasn't got the substance to be effected. And that's as CJ said, that's got to come to the top. I want to measure what is the pay gap year on year. I want to have targets that say, yeah, I've got a pay gap, okay? I admit it, I've got a pay gap on my, now, what is my target? In the next 2 years, the gap's, 15%. In the next 2 years, I want to be at 7 or 6 or 3 or whatever the percentage is, and then to measure. And then when it's not happening, to say, why is it not happening? What is holding it back? And then to fix that. Is it an individual who's battling? because a lot of the legislation and the frameworks didn't come with the change management guide. And for me, there's a whole change in mindset here that people need to embrace, and they haven't been given, that the sort of training, the influencing to say this has got to be different, and it's okay. It's going to be okay. It's that old adage, I don't want to change, I don't want to change. And then when the change happens, they're thinking, what took me so long? It's just that, for me, it's a lot of it is around the change management framework that supports all the changes that we want to put in place and makes people feel safe in those environments. It's not about paying women more or men. It's actually, here's a job. This is the requirements. We get the 100%, Niven, we get the 100%. Yes. And candidates who have the 100%, doesn't matter what they are, get paid X. And that's to get there, there's got to be the frameworks and the change management, that the recruiters are not even looking at the name. They're looking at the credentials and saying, this is the right person, this is the pay grade for this job, and this is what I'm going to pay. And I think some of the gap is a woman might come in and she might be earning 10. Okay. Now she's applied for a job that's going to earn 30, and they say that's too much of an increase to pay her. It's not too much. It's adjusting for reality. And it's that mindset that says, I think we have to do this slowly, and the gap just keeps widening. So it's really that willingness and intent, and then the change management through the organization.
Yeah. So it's a little bit of the case of, policy and behaviors catching up with what we are aspiring to. Yeah.
Correct.
So I would like to start bringing us to a close, unless there's a question in the group. So, Caroline?
Yeah.
Sure.
I've been thinking a lot about opportunities that exist for us to bring men into experiences and to really experience what we as women go through. I'm currently on maternity leave, and my friend who's here with me as well is also on maternity leave. And my husband is looking after both our babies today, which I think is pretty awesome. Yeah. But for me, it made me think about, where are there opportunities for us to bring men in our families, in the workplace, to really get a feel for what we as women deal with, whether it is time to spend with their children on a maternity leave or paternity leave. I really applaud the 3 or 4 men that I see here today actually sitting in and listening to some of our experiences. And I'm thinking about the workplace. Are there opportunities? There have been so many times that I, as a woman, have been the only woman in a room full of men, sitting around the table. I very rarely see experiences or opportunities where there's a single man in a room full of women, and what that might feel like for them. So just kind of thinking through what are those opportunities in the workplace or in our homes where we can get men to really experience what we feel and what we go through, and how that might start changing the mindset a little. So I don't know if that's a question or a comment, but just thought I would put it out there.
Would you like to comment first, CJ?
Sure, it's a real bugbear of mine. Every Women's Day, I'm just like, I appreciate it's Women's Day, but can we have more men in the room? But then I've reframed it for myself. I've said this is the equivalent of our golf. So we must make sure we network, we walk away with business cards, with opportunities for each other, and not just use it as a morning to have tea and coffee, right? Yeah. So, but absolutely, we have to have men in these conversations, not just on Women's Day, throughout. And we've got to find ways where we do have women in those rooms and they're the solitary women, to force the conversation somehow, at least to bring enlightenment. Because to be honest, I'm yet to meet someone who is intentionally not wanting women at the table. They just don't know how. They just don't know how. And even the example I used earlier where I kept getting asked questions, say, how are your children coping, etc. I saw it, I took a step back. Initially, I was very offended. Then I took a step back and said, this is actually coming from a point of care. What this individual doesn't realize is it is probably so ingrained in their thinking that even in making decisions about career progression, they will initially put the thought of, but she's a woman, she might not be able to first. So it's also my duty to help them to become more aware of the fact that that question is very relevant, but not just for me, but everyone else in our team. So how do we have more of those conversations? Yeah.
Love that. Thank you, CJ. Would you like to add to that, Lorraine?
Well, I think I did a bit earlier say that we need the men in the room. We need to discuss with them how they feel, how we feel, and try to establish that common ground where everyone feels comfortable having the conversations, tough and not tough conversations. And it's just, sometimes in society it's a natural segregation. You'll go to a social event and you'll find the men standing over there and the women standing over there, and it's consciously to go and stand with the men and say, do you mind if I join you? And likewise, you see more and more men coming over and say, hey, I'd like to come and sit and hear what's happening here. But it's so societal, I think it came up in yours, the habit. It's also just breaking that habit.
Yeah, you know, to add to CJ's point around I'm yet to find an organization that says we don't want women in our team. It reminds me of a piece of work that we're doing with another organization around diversity, equity, and inclusion. One of the people said, you know, it's not that we don't want the difference. We want the difference, but we haven't learned how to leverage the difference. So how do we create organizations that have the behaviors that allow for the difference? So our closing statements, is there a path? Is there a formula? Is there to getting to that seat of influence?
I think there is. I think there's a few things. It's looking for opportunities within your organization. So don't jump out of the box. You know, don't let your box be confining to you. Put your hand up. Try new things. You won't always succeed. The courage to be there, be at the table. To the point just raised there, I've been in many meetings where I'm the only woman. Many, many meetings. The first few, I was quite intimidated. And after that, you say, no, I'm here to show them that actually I'm an equal at the table, that women can do this, that we can add value, that we actually will bring a perspective that they maybe didn't have before I was at the table. So there's definitely a path, but it does take courage and it takes support. Support at work, at home, all around. So when you do have some bad experiences, and when you put up your hand, it might always, what you thought it was might not be what it actually is to also have the courage to say, thanks, not quite for me, I'll move off in this direction, but I'll hand it over, make sure no balls get dropped, so I don't want to do this. And so I think that's for me, the key for women who want to move through the ranks.
Thank you, Lorraine. And do you want to hold on? And let's take a question from Pam, and then we'll come to you. Okay, Pam?
So more of a comment or just something I can challenge all of us with in the room. So great conference this morning. Thank you to everybody. We really learned a lot. And I was just like taking everything in, being somebody who's in corporate with a side hustle, but also driving my corporate agenda and taking in all the advice, taking in, you know, all the tools shared. But I'm also thinking that in as much as we say break the bias, can we also look at us as females? Because I think most of us, when we get to that table, when we are sitting in that C-suite position, how much are we driving the agenda to pull up another woman to come and join us at that table? Because if the table is consisting of 8 gentlemen and 1 female, and I can pull 2 more, that's now 3 voices that are speaking within that organization. But we also know very much, ladies, you know, that our love for each other maybe is not at that, you know, level where we drive such a passion to say, let's break our own bias, you know, woman to woman, to want to see the next woman want to achieve, you know, that success, to want to see the next woman even come in at a higher position, you know, as yourself. So in saying that, just to comment, if I look at the panel today, I'm a friend of Fortune, as well as a stylist. And I mean, I've heard so much about CJ. It's lovely to meet you in person. All the inspiring, talks that you share. Zimbini, we've met before. Niven, I've also heard so much about you. And you can actually see how she's authentically living what she's talking about today by incorporating all these people that influence her on a daily basis. But never mind that. As we sit then in this room, we've got Dudu next to me, who's from Ayanda Naturals, who's a sponsor to the organization. You've got myself from Exquisite Hanger. And her extension of wanting to help does not stop just with her own events. It also extends to the kind of help that Niven would have given her to open up doors for her. So yes, we drive the agenda, break the bias, absolutely. But let's drive that more within ourselves as females to create those opportunities for other women. Thanks.
Thank you, Pam. I think that is a noble challenge to all of us, and I hope that you do take it seriously. So thank you. CJ, any closing thoughts?
Yes, so two closing thoughts. The first one, completely agree. I think as women, we're not good at, and I'll use the term, playing politics and using influence. You're sitting in here, there's lots of powerful women in here. How many business cards have exchanged hands? How many of you have tried to engage and meet with other people? How many of you have stopped to say, okay, how can I benefit from you? Because it's actually okay to benefit from each other as women. How can I help you get better or do better in your workplace? And how do I get better? By leveraging the relationship that I have with you. And that's something I'm learning. It's something that's still very fresh for me. I get very uncomfortable, but it's something that is absolutely critical. You asked the question around what got me here. I wish I could have a linear answer. I don't. But I do think the one thing has been the equivalent of your legs. I wish I don't have the same legs. Your leg story. But I grew up, I feel like one of the big things that's had such an influence on me is I grew up with a mother who just always told me, I can. She always said, you can. So I've always had an incredibly high level of self-belief, to the point where she would have to kind of hold me steady when I wasn't doing well. And she'd say, you fail sometimes, and it's okay to fail. But I do think that ability to believe in yourself and say, you know what, I can, is so important. And I can't see it through in terms of 5 steps ahead, but I know I can make that next step. And I think that's the takeaway from me for my everyday life. I can take the next right step, and I can.
Thank you, CJ. I can take the next right step. Goes back to the, what Zimbini was saying, that 90% of life is about showing up. So thank you. So CJ and Lorraine, thank you so much. I'm not seeing any hands in the room. But what I would like to say is thank you very much. And Sharonisa, may I please have Lorraine's...
I thought I was getting a second one.
Debbie, are you listening to this? She said she thought she was getting a second one. But you are going to get a second one from Origa, so I think that they're going to come.
Just kidding.
Thank you. On behalf of Luminary, courtesy of Estee Lauder. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, CJ. Okay, so I've got announcements. I've noted them. And then also I just wanted to check. Thank you so much. You can take a seat. Thank you. So I'm wondering, do we have, by a show of hands, who in here has their business card? Not many people. Not many people. Okay, all right. So I ask because we have a few prizes. It would have been good to give them away. And Oh, wow. I didn't even know. I'm even surprised because I didn't even know. So I've got prizes here. So do you give me permission to pick in the group based on people who asked questions, who engaged? You're happy for me to do that? Should I read out what the prizes are and then maybe you tell me no? So first, we've got, okay, so maybe let me start with the highest value. Some people would argue not because they would say, maybe what's in the book will be, So we've got, this one surprised me as well. We've got a 1,600 rands voucher from Exquisite Hanger. And I think that we can all agree the person who engaged the most was Yvonne. Thank you. We have a voucher to the value of 1,000 rand from Ayanda Naturals. Do I have permission to give it to Merle? Because I think that she shared very courageously and authentically when she was sharing how she saw herself in Zimbini. Are you happy for me to do that? And then I can't, thank you so much, ma'am. And then I think there was also another contribution from the back. I remember 1987, but I don't remember the name. Shafika. I am a girl and I like soccer. Thank you, Shafika. The moment of lift, who would like to tell us who this one should go to? I don't want to say Pam because she did give us quite a hard challenge because then people will be like, that's her friend. But what I also know is that Caroline did also challenge us about, some of those biases. So should we give it to Caroline? Are you happy? So I'm telling you, literally, I've got stories for days. So I interviewed Caroline. I tried to poach Caroline from PwC when I was at Deloitte. So I interviewed her. We had many conversations. She almost joined my team. And then on the last minute, she said, no. No, but no thanks.
Maybe there's still one day we'll.
Maybe there's still a chance. Yes, yeah. And then I think there is a request for a photo. Maybe if we can, I think there's two. One is the break the bias stance in the room, and then one outside in front. So maybe after I do the vote of thanks, we can do the break the bias photo in the room and then one outside. So I would like to do my vote of thanks, but I had to write everything down because so many people have come to the party to make today possible. So firstly, I would like to say to our headline sponsors, Origa Beauty, Tinashe, may I ask you to stand? Each and every one of you received a goodie bag with good quality products, from satin pillowcases to bonnets to shower caps to brushes to combs, all that. And those beautiful products, you can find them in Clicks. And Origa Beauty sponsored a pack for each person in the room today. So for that, thank you very much. Estee Lauder, who not only contributed to the live streaming capability today, but also contributed generously to the gifts that we gave to our speakers and panelists. Devni and team at ELC, thank you very much. To Aspen, Lorraine, thank you for saying yes. I literally sent her a note. Lorraine, do you have a moment to speak? She said, yes. I said, listen, I'm doing this thing. Yes, I'm doing it. So for you, for taking part today, for your organization in contributing to the live streaming capability, thank you so much. To our gold sponsor, Old Mutual. Where's the Old Mutual table? Can we hear? Oh, woo-hoo! We appreciate your partnership. To our silver sponsors, one of them, my former employer, Deloitte. May I hear some noise from my fellow Deloitians? Green dots. Woo-hoo! Thank you so much. And to Luminaries Bank, ABSA. I literally called one of my executive MBA classmates, Haroon Abrahams. So thank you very much, Haroon. I think I did speak to one of, yes, I spoke to you, Benny, and I said I spoke to Haroon and he came through for us, so thank you very much. So Pam mentioned that I've literally tapped into my social capital, social network to be able to pull this off. So you would have seen a screen that was looping slides outside that came from Hirsch because Pam works for Samsung and they supply Hirsch, and that screen was supplied and sponsored by Hirsch. Thank you very much. To Exquisite Hanger, this beautiful skirt, which I think is the reason why I kept on getting compliments, was supplied by Exquisite Hanger. So thank you very much. I'm sure you would have seen that all the Luminary team members are putting on Luminary branded t-shirts, and they were sponsored by Intelliscan. In fact, we've got a representative from Intelliscan. Cynthia, thank you very much. We appreciate you. To Ayanda Naturals, Merle's got the voucher for 1,000 Rand, which came from Ayanda Naturals. Spongosi for your sponsorship, thank you very much. And then to my excellent team, Primrose and Farah, the engine behind the whole event. Where are you? Thank you. To the rest of the team, Taquin, so Taquin and I were together at Deloitte, and now we are together at Luminary. She said somebody sent her a message and said, did you see Fortune's Luminary LinkedIn post? I know that you left Deloitte, but Fortune's left Deloitte, so maybe just find her. Maybe you guys can work together again. To Tanya. Tanya, I can't see you, thank you. To Sharonisa, thank you so much for your dedication. To Elisma. So Elisma's been my photographer, I think since 2013. I sent her a WhatsApp. I said, listen, I'm doing this thing. She's like, oh no, that will be my good deed for the day, so I'm going to come and do it. So Elisma, thank you very much. I would not be able to do half the things that I do without the support of my amazing partner, my husband. Onassis, thank you so much for your undying support. And to our attendees who heeded the call and said yes, thank you so much for taking part in this very important conversation. We will be hosting another one in Joburg in August, so we hope to see your Joburg colleagues at the August conversation in Johannesburg. I don't have any more comments from my side, apart from the fact that I understand you're all going to get parking tickets from Prim, or they're going to be validated from Prim. So I think the last thing, there she's raising her hand at the back. Thank you. And then I would like to close off by saying this conversation would not have been as meaningful and as deep as it was without our speakers bringing their whole selves, their authenticity, their generosity. So I would really like to thank each of you from the bottom of my heart. Thank you so much. I really deeply appreciate you. And Elisma, the floor is all yours. Thank you so much. Have a lovely afternoon. Stand and do our break the bias. Yes, arms crossing like the girl on the left of the screen. think we're also sucking in our stomach.
That's perfect.
Thank you. And should we go outside?